good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, I'm sure you've heard this term before, but have you ever heard it used in terms of film? Well, today you're going to. However, I'm going to flip it around to the ugly, the bad, and the good. Overall, I will be focusing on the representation in films of a community that has had its past of discrimination, the LGBTQ+ community. Now, while the community faces less discrimination than it did 60 years ago, there is still not much representation present in films. And the representation that is there is often inaccurate or just flat out bad. During this video, I will take you through a few examples of this representation. In general, inaccurate representation is a common theme amongst LGBTQ+ films. Whether it be historical or a portrayal of the community, there are very few films where good representation is present, and filmmakers need to take these good examples into account whilst creating their own films. Let's start off with the ugly. This is where the worst of the worst come in terms of film representation. This is where I would categorize the historical inaccuracies within the community, simply because this discredits the community and the important historical figures that were a major part of getting the rights the LGBTQ+ community deserved. For example, one of the films I found is considered to be the worst of the LGBTQ+ films of all time, and it's called Stonewall. Now, this film was created in 2015, and it was supposed to be based on the Stonewall riots that took place in 1969. However, this film is essentially a whitewashed version of what actually happened. The main character is a white, cisgender, gay man who led the cause. This is far from the actual truth, which was that transgender women of color mainly led the Stonewall riots. One of the main leaders was Marsha P. Johnson, who they did include in this film. However, they used her mainly for comedic relief.
Marsha P. Johnson, if you please, darling.
What does P stand for?
Pay no mind!
Also, the main character in this film is seen as throwing the first brick at Stonewall, when that was, again, most likely not what actually happened. However, there is a lot of talk about whether there was even an actual brick thrown at Stonewall, and most people who say it was true credit Marsha P. Johnson or Sylvia Rivera. As a whole, this film credits the wrong people and leaves them more discriminated against members of the community without the acknowledgement that they deserve for having such a big impact. In the end, if you are going to base a film off of true events, then make sure it at least stays close to the truth. Next is the bad. While this is not as awful as inaccurately portraying the community's history, there are still improvements that need to be made in this category. For example, these are the films that portray the community inaccurately to appease more viewers, or they will also have straight actors play members of the community on the big screen. Now, I know that sounds confusing, but what I mean by this is that there are many films out there that follow characters who are part of the community. However, these films are often tailored more towards the straight community. One film that represents both of these qualities is Love, Simon. This film follows Simon Spire, who is played by Nick Robinson, a straight actor. This film is about coming out and the experience around it. It deals with friends and family, and them reacting to Simon's sexuality. It is a basic coming-of-age film, with the one twist of Simon being, of course, gay.
I'm supposed to be the one that decides when and where and who knows. That's supposed to be my thing.
This film is essentially made for straight people, though, because he isn't too gay. As Brian Schock of the Amherst Wire puts it, he's not too gay to be the star of his own film, but just gay enough to be considered revolutionary for the big screen. This displays how the film studios kept their representation to a level where it was still acceptable to the straight audience. Brian also goes on to mention that having a queer character would have pushed the film back into the niche film market and film festival circuit that queer films are commonly sequestered to. Basically, having a main character who is more loud about their sexuality would have made this a film that most likely wouldn't have made it to movie theaters all around the world. Filmmakers not only cater to straight people, but they also cast them to play LGBTQ+ roles. This is another point of misrepresentation within the film industry. This has a negative impact for many reasons. Firstly, because if you cast non-members of the community for these roles, then that is just taking away opportunities for actual members in this industry. Secondly, as mentioned in this research article created by Rob Cover, we need every actor to bring genuine, real experience to these roles, so they're not relying on stereotypes of what they think a transgender or lesbian person is like. Now, this quote is directly talking about transgender and lesbian people. However, this is also true for the rest of the community. Without the real-life experience, how would you truly understand what people within the community face? The answer is you can't. While the acting might be good on the surface level, there ultimately is not depth and understanding, since these actors simply did not have these experiences. And people within the community can pick up on these superficial attempts. Those films were a betrayal of the issues still present within the film industry today. However, there are also some films that hit it out of the park in terms of representation. Films that have won countless awards since they truly understand what the community wants to see. Two of these examples are Moonlight and Pride. I'll start off with Moonlight. This film essentially counteracts Love, Simon. What is very interesting about this film is that it was directed and acted by straight people, yet this film was made for members of the LGBTQ+ community. Now, this basically opposes what I just mentioned before. However, I will say, as many others have also said, that this is probably the only case in which an LGBTQ+ film that was created by straight people accurately portrays members. This film was real in a way that not a lot of LGBTQ+ films are. It felt grounded and not over-dramatized. It also told a story that not many of us have heard about before. It focuses on the main character, Chiron, who is coming to terms with his sexuality and racial identity in a community that might not embrace him for it. It displays his struggles with how he personally feels and the pressures from the community around him. It gives minority groups the representation they deserve, and it does it incredibly. It doesn't straightwash it in a way that makes sure the character has a happy ending by being accepted by everyone. It just gives the plain truth, which is something that we as a community needed to see.
At some point, you gotta decide for yourself who you're gonna be. Can't let nobody make that decision for you.
This is a beautiful example of representation of struggles the community faces. However, that isn't the only thing that should be portrayed well. As I mentioned previously, having historically inaccurate representation is one of the worst things films can do, so therefore having accurate representation is one of the best. The next example we are going to be looking at is Pride, which was a 2014 film that depicted the lesbians and gays support the miners movement of the 80s. This was a movement in which, you guessed it, members of the community raised money for the National Union of Mine Workers, who at the time were on strike because they wanted higher wages. The film itself was historically accurate. It was based on true events, and unlike Stonewall, there was a lot of truth to the film.
A gaggle of gays and lesbians has come out in favor of the miners' strike.
Director Stephen Beresford mentioned in an interview with CBS Films that he found it very difficult to stray from the actual facts once he started working on the film. The actors also based most of their own characters on actual people that were involved in the movement. The people who had characters based off of them believed that the way that they were portrayed was correct. Di Donovan, who was a miner in real life, was portrayed by Patty Considine. Di mentioned in the interview that Considine portrayed me as someone that was sincere, likable, and open. It's something that you will always be grateful to them for. Having the real-life individuals be a part of the filming process and having them there for the actors to take inspiration from was a good decision that I believe added to the accuracy of the film. This leads directly into what I believe everyone should take into consideration when either looking for or creating films with good representation. In the end, it all boils down to good films needing good representation. I have shown what ugly and bad representation looks like, and this is what I believe we should steer away from. We don't need any more historically inaccurate films. We should learn from our past mistakes and move on to create a more truthful future in films. What is a little bit of research to the impact a film can have on a whole community? We also need to cast more members of the LGBTQ+ community into gay roles instead of straight people, and gear those films towards the audience they are about. These films can have a profound impact on our youth. For example, when they are able to see these characters and actors that on some level they are able to relate to, it reminds them that they are not alone. We have the blueprint to create these good films, and now we just need to use it.